Nothing could have prepared her for what she witnessed in her classroom that morning. Before her students' eyes, floating water droplets formed what looked like Arabic words. That moment marked the beginning of a journey that led this beautiful American teacher to embrace Islam. Sarah Mitchell stood before the whiteboard in her fifth-grade classroom at Lincoln Elementary School in Portland, Oregon, watching 26 pairs of eyes stare back at her with varying degrees of attention. The autumn sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden rectangles across worn carpet and small desks arranged in neat rows. At 29, she had been teaching for 7 years, long enough to recognize the restless energy that preceded winter break, yet still young enough to remember her own childhood wonder at learning something new. "Who can tell me what causes the seasons?" she asked, her voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm that had made her popular among students and parents alike. Several hands shot up immediately, including that of Amira Hassan, a quiet girl who had joined their class just 2 months earlier when her family moved from Syria. Sarah had always prided herself on creating an inclusive environment where every child felt welcome, regardless of their background. Growing up in a liberal household in Eugene, she had been taught to celebrate diversity and approach different cultures with curiosity rather than judgment. Her parents, both university professors, had raised her to value education, critical thinking, and social justice. Religion, however, had never played a significant role in their family life, beyond the occasional Christmas celebration and Easter egg hunt. "The earth tilts on its axis," called out Jake, a freckled boy in the front row who never hesitated to speak up. "That's right, Jake. And what does that mean for different parts of our planet?" Sarah continued, moving to the globe that sat on her desk. As she spun it slowly, pointing out how the northern hemisphere tilted away from the sun during winter months, she noticed Amira watching intently, her dark eyes following every movement. The Hassan family had arrived in Portland as refugees, part of a resettlement program that brought families escaping the violence in Syria to communities across America. Dr. Ahmed Hassan, Amira's father, had been a university professor in Damascus before the war forced them to flee. His wife, Fatima, had been a nurse. Now Ahmed worked as a translator for the resettlement agency, while studying to have his credentials recognized in the United States, and Fatima cleaned offices at night to help make ends meet. Sarah had made special efforts to help Amira adjust, staying after school to provide extra support with English and connecting her with the school's ESL resources. The girl was remarkably bright, often grasping mathematical concepts before her American-born classmates, but she struggled with the language barrier and seemed perpetually homesick. "Miss Mitchell," Amira raised her hand tentatively. "In my old school, we learned that Allah creates the seasons to show His wisdom. The Quran says that in the changing of seasons are signs for people who think." An uncomfortable silence fell over the classroom. Several students turned to stare at Amira, and Sarah felt the familiar tension that arose whenever religion entered classroom discussions. As a public school teacher, she had been trained to navigate these moments carefully, acknowledging students' perspectives while maintaining the separation of church and state. "That's an interesting way to think about it, Amira," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Many cultures and religions have different explanations for natural phenomena. In science class, we focus on the physical causes we can observe and measure." Amira nodded quietly and looked down at her desk, her cheeks flushing slightly. Sarah made a mental note to speak with her privately later, wanting to ensure the girl felt comfortable sharing her thoughts without being dismissed. The day continued with its usual rhythm of lessons, lunch duty, and afternoon activities. Sarah taught with passion, genuinely loving her work, despite the challenges of managing diverse learning needs, limited resources, and increasing administrative demands. Her classroom walls were covered with student artwork, motivational posters, and a world map where students placed pins to mark their families' countries of origin. It was a visual representation of the melting pot that was modern America, and Sarah took pride in fostering an environment where every heritage was valued. After school, she found Amira slowly packing her backpack, moving more deliberately than usual. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked, pulling up a small chair to sit beside her student's desk. "I'm sorry if I said something wrong about Allah and the seasons," Amira said quietly, not meeting her teacher's eyes. "My mama says I shouldn't talk about our beliefs at school because it makes people uncomfortable." Sarah's heart clenched. "You didn't say anything wrong, Amira. I want you to feel free to share your thoughts in our classroom. It's just that in American public schools, we try to include everyone's perspectives while focusing on what we can learn through observation and testing." "But what if Allah is the reason behind what we observe?" Amira asked, her young voice carrying a wisdom that seemed beyond her 11 years. "What if the science and the faith are not opposites?" The question lingered with Sarah long after Amira had gathered her things and left for the bus. That evening, grading papers in her cozy apartment overlooking the Willamette River, she found herself thinking about the girl's words. Sarah had always viewed science and religion as fundamentally incompatible, one based on evidence and reason, the other on faith and tradition. Yet Amira had posed the question with such sincere curiosity that it challenged Sarah's assumptions. Over the following weeks, Sarah began paying closer attention to Amira's contributions in class. Despite her limited English, the girl demonstrated remarkable insight across subjects. During their unit on world geography, Amira shared stories about Damascus that brought ancient history to life. In math, she showed problem-solving approaches that differed from the textbook methods but were equally valid. Most intriguingly, she often connected their lessons to broader themes of purpose and meaning in ways that her classmates found compelling. "Miss Mitchell," asked Marcus, an energetic boy who struggled academically, "why does Amira always talk about Allah when we're doing science? My mom says Muslims are dangerous." The question came during recess duty, with Amira well out of earshot, but other students gathering around with obvious curiosity. Sarah felt the weight of the teachable moment, knowing that her response could shape these children's understanding of an entire faith tradition. "Different people have different beliefs about God and how the world works," she explained carefully. "Amira's family are Muslims, which means they follow the religion of Islam. Like Christians and Jews and people of other faiths, they believe God created the universe. That doesn't make them dangerous. It makes them people who see the world through the lens of their beliefs, just like your family might see the world through theirs." "But on TV, they always show scary Muslims," Marcus persisted. "Television often shows extreme examples because they're dramatic," Sarah replied. "Most Muslims, like most Christians and most people of any faith, are peaceful people who want the same things we all want: to take care of their families, contribute to their communities, and live in peace." She made a mental note to plan lessons about world religions, presenting them from an academic perspective that would help her students understand the diversity of human belief systems. It seemed increasingly important as she watched Amira navigate the complex social dynamics of being different in a small community where many families had never personally encountered Muslim neighbors. The turning point came on a rainy December morning during their science unit on weather patterns. Sarah had set up an experiment to demonstrate how clouds form, using hot water, ice, and clear containers to show the process of evaporation and condensation. The students were gathered around her demonstration table, watching as she carefully poured hot water into a large glass jar. "Now watch what happens when I place this plate of ice on top," she said, positioning the ice-filled plate over the jar's opening. Steam began rising from the hot water, and within moments, water droplets started forming on the bottom of the cold plate. "That's so cool!" exclaimed several students as they watched the miniature water cycle in action. Sarah was explaining how this process occurs in the atmosphere when Amira suddenly gasped, pointing at the demonstration. "Miss Mitchell, look!" Everyone turned to see what had captured Amira's attention. Above the condensation that had formed normally on the plate, additional water droplets were suspended in the air itself, forming what appeared to be tiny, perfect geometric patterns. The droplets weren't falling or rising. They were simply floating in precise formations that defied the basic principles of physics Sarah understood. "That's unusual," Sarah said, studying the phenomenon more closely. She had conducted this experiment dozens of times over the years and had never seen anything like it. The water droplets hung in the air like tiny crystals, creating intricate patterns that looked almost intentional. "It looks like Arabic writing," whispered Amira, her voice filled with awe. Sarah looked more carefully and felt a chill run down her spine. The patterns did indeed resemble calligraphy, though she couldn't read Arabic herself. The other students pressed closer, their earlier restlessness replaced by genuine wonder. "How is that possible?" asked Emma, one of Sarah's most scientifically minded students. "Water droplets can't just float in air like that." Sarah checked the experimental setup, looking for any logical explanation. The hot water continued steaming normally, the ice plate remained cold, and the regular condensation process continued as expected. Yet above it all, these additional droplets maintained their impossible suspension and intricate formations. "Amira," Sarah said quietly, "what do you think the patterns say?" The girl studied them intently, her face reflecting a mixture of excitement and reverence. I think it says Allah is the creator of all things, but I'm not sure. My Arabic reading is not perfect." The patterns remained visible for nearly 10 minutes, far longer than any normal atmospheric phenomenon should have lasted, before gradually dissipating. The students watched in fascination as the droplets slowly faded, leaving behind only the conventional condensation that belonged in any science textbook. When the bell rang for lunch, the children filed out buzzing with excitement about what they had witnessed. Sarah remained in the classroom, staring at the now normal demonstration setup and trying to process what had occurred. As a person who had built her worldview on rational explanations and observable phenomena, she struggled to make sense of an event that seemed to defy natural laws. That afternoon, she found herself approaching Amira after school again. "What you saw in those patterns," Sarah began hesitantly. "Are you certain about what they said?" Amira nodded solemnly. "My father taught me some Quran verses in Arabic. Those words looked like verse from Surah Al-An'am. Allah is the creator of all things, and He is the guardian over all things. But Miss Mitchell, I don't understand why it happened." "Neither do I," Sarah admitted. "But I'd like to learn more about what you saw. Would it be appropriate for me to speak with your parents about this?" Amira's face lit up with surprise and pleasure. "They would be honored to talk with you. My father especially loves to discuss faith and learning." That evening, Sarah found herself standing at the door of a modest apartment in East Portland, holding a bottle of sparkling cider and feeling more nervous than she had in years. She had called ahead and been warmly invited by Dr. Hassan, who had seemed both surprised and delighted by her interest in discussing the day's events. Fatima Hassan greeted her with genuine warmth, offering tea and homemade pastries while apologizing for their simple furnishings. The apartment was small but immaculately clean, decorated with beautiful calligraphy and family photographs that showed a life interrupted by tragedy but maintained with dignity. Dr. Hassan, a tall man with kind eyes and graying temples, spoke excellent English despite his accent. "Miss Mitchell, we are so grateful for your kindness to Amira. She speaks of you constantly and has felt welcome in your classroom during a very difficult transition." "Amira is a wonderful student," Sarah replied sincerely. "But I wanted to talk with you about something unusual that happened today." She described the morning's experiment and the impossible water patterns that had formed. As she spoke, she watched the Hassan family exchange meaningful glances. "You saw Arabic writing in the water droplets?" Dr. Hassan asked, leaning forward with intense interest. Amira believed so. She thought it referenced a Quranic verse about Allah being the creator of all things. Fatima spoke rapidly in Arabic to her husband, who nodded thoughtfully before turning back to Sarah. "In Islamic tradition," he explained, "we believe that Allah sometimes provides signs to guide people toward truth. These signs can appear in nature, in dreams, or in unexpected moments. The Quran says, 'We shall show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear that it is the truth.'" Sarah felt uncomfortable with the implication. "I'm not sure I believe in supernatural signs. There might be a scientific explanation we haven't considered." Of course, Dr. Hassan agreed. Islam actually encourages the pursuit of knowledge and scientific understanding. The Quran contains many verses that encourage observation of natural phenomena, but it also teaches that science reveals the mechanisms through which Allah works, rather than replacing the need for a creator. Over the next hour, Sarah found herself engaged in the most intellectually stimulating religious discussion of her life. Dr. Hassan proved to be remarkably well educated, not only in Islamic theology, but also in philosophy, science, and comparative religion. He spoke about Islam's historical contributions to mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, painting a picture of faith and reason, working in harmony rather than opposition. "The Quran was revealed over 14 centuries ago," he explained, "yet it contains descriptions of embryological development, astronomical phenomena, and natural processes that weren't discovered by Western science until recent centuries. For Muslims, this suggests divine knowledge rather than human invention." Fatima added her own perspective, speaking about how Islam had empowered her as a woman, contrary to Western stereotypes. "People see my hijab and assume I am oppressed, but I chose to wear it as an expression of my faith and dignity. Islam gave me education, a career, and a voice in my community." As Sarah walked back to her car that evening, her mind raced with new ideas and questions. The Hassan family had challenged many of her assumptions about Islam while treating her with remarkable hospitality and respect. Their faith seemed to provide them with strength and purpose that helped them navigate tremendous hardships with grace. Over the following days, Sarah found herself researching Islam online, reading about its history, beliefs, and practices. She discovered that many of her preconceptions had been shaped more by media portrayals and political rhetoric than by actual knowledge of the religion. The Islam she read about emphasized justice, compassion, knowledge-seeking, and devotion to one God, values that resonated with her own moral convictions. The water droplet incident continued to puzzle her. She had consulted with colleagues in the science department at a nearby high school, described the phenomenon to a physicist friend, and even attempted to replicate the conditions that might have caused it. Nothing she tried produced anything resembling the impossible patterns Amira had identified as Arabic text. 2 weeks later, during a lesson on light and reflection, another unexplainable event occurred in Sarah's classroom. She was demonstrating how prisms split white light into rainbows when the beam passing through one of the prisms suddenly began forming what appeared to be symbols in the air. Unlike the water droplets, these symbols were composed of pure light, hovering impossibly without any surface to reflect against. This time, several students immediately recognized the formations as resembling Arabic calligraphy, though none could read what the symbols might say. Sarah stared at the phenomenon, her rational mind struggling to process what her eyes clearly observed. "Miss Mitchell," Amira said softly, "may I tell you what I think those symbols say?" Sarah nodded, no longer concerned about maintaining strict separation between science and religious interpretation. "I believe it says, 'La ilaha illa Allah.' There is no God but Allah. It's the first part of the Shahada, the declaration of faith in Islam." The light patterns remained visible for several minutes before gradually fading, leaving Sarah with a growing sense that something beyond coincidence was occurring in her classroom. That evening, she called Dr. Hassan to describe the second incident. "Miss Mitchell," he said gently, "in Islam, we believe that Allah guides people toward truth in His own time and way. Perhaps these signs are meant for you to consider." "But I'm not looking to convert to anything," Sarah protested. "I'm just trying to understand what's happening." "Understanding is often the first step toward faith," Dr. Hassan replied. "Would you be interested in learning more about Islam purely from an educational perspective? I could recommend some books, or we could continue our discussions." Sarah agreed, finding herself genuinely curious about a religion she had previously known only through headlines and stereotypes. Dr. Hassan provided her with an English translation of the Quran, along with several books written by American converts to Islam that might help her understand how Western minds had grappled with Islamic concepts. Reading the Quran proved to be a revelation in itself. Sarah had expected an ancient text filled with incomprehensible rules and harsh judgments. Instead, she found a book that emphasized God's mercy and compassion while providing guidance for living an ethical life. Many passages resonated with her own values: the importance of seeking knowledge, caring for the poor and orphaned, treating all people with justice regardless of their background, and recognizing the sacred nature of human life. The concept of Tawhid, the absolute oneness and unity of God, appealed to her rational mind in ways she hadn't anticipated. Rather than the complex theological concepts she associated with Christianity, Islam presented a clear, straightforward understanding of humanity's relationship with its Creator. As winter turned to spring, Sarah began incorporating more world religion content into her social studies lessons, always careful to present various faiths objectively while helping students understand their historical and cultural significance. She noticed that discussions about Islam generated particularly intense interest, with students asking thoughtful questions that went beyond their textbook materials. The third unexplainable event occurred during these religion lessons in March. Sarah was showing a documentary about various places of worship around the world when the classroom's old television began displaying images that weren't part of the program. Instead of the mosque footage that should have been playing, the screen showed what appeared to be the interior of the Kaaba in Mecca, with thousands of pilgrims performing the ritual circumambulation. What made the scene impossible was that the camera angle seemed to be positioned high above the crowd, providing a perspective that wouldn't be available to any earthly filming equipment. Moreover, the image had a luminous quality that seemed to emanate light rather than simply reflecting it. The students watched in amazed silence as the impossible footage continued for nearly 5 minutes. Several Muslim families had recently moved to the district, and their children immediately recognized the significance of what they were seeing. "That's the Holy Kaaba," said Rashid, a new student whose family had immigrated from Pakistan. "But how can we see it like this? It's like we're flying above it." When the regular documentary resumed, Sarah felt a profound shift in her understanding of what she was experiencing. 3 separate incidents, all involving Islamic themes, all defying scientific explanation, all occurring in her classroom where she had been learning about Islam and growing closer to the Hassan family. That afternoon, she stayed late to think and pray, though she wasn't entirely sure to whom she was praying. The rational part of her mind continued seeking logical explanations, but another part was beginning to acknowledge the possibility that something beyond natural law was trying to communicate with her. Over dinner with the Hassan family that weekend, Sarah shared her confusion and growing sense of spiritual searching. "I've always been skeptical of religious claims," she admitted, "but I can't explain what's been happening in my classroom. And the more I learn about Islam, the more it challenges my assumptions about faith and reason." Dr. Hassan smiled warmly. Islam teaches that the heart and mind should work together, not against each other. The Quran repeatedly calls on people to think, reflect, and use their intellect to recognize truth. Faith isn't the absence of reason. It's reason informed by humility about the limits of human knowledge. But what if I'm wrong? Sarah asked. What if I'm seeing patterns where none exist, finding meaning in coincidences? What if you're right? Fatima countered gently. What if Allah is calling you toward truth and your hesitation comes from fear rather than wisdom? The question haunted Sarah for weeks. She continued studying Islamic texts, attending occasional lectures at the local Islamic center, and developing friendships within the Muslim community. What impressed her most was the diversity she encountered. Muslims from dozens of countries and ethnic backgrounds, converts from various religious traditions, professionals and laborers, all united by shared beliefs and practices that seemed to strengthen rather than constrain them. In April, Sarah's principal announced that the district would be hosting a multicultural festival, with each teacher encouraged to organize a booth representing different world cultures. Sarah volunteered to coordinate the Islamic culture display, working with Muslim families to create an educational presentation about their faith, traditions, and countries of origin. The festival preparation brought Sarah into regular contact with the broader Muslim community. She helped coordinate contributions of food, artwork, and educational materials, while learning about Islamic contributions to art, science, and literature. The project felt natural and meaningful in ways that her previous extracurricular activities had not. On the evening before the festival, Sarah was alone in her classroom, arranging final display materials, when the fourth unexplainable event occurred. As she organized books about Islamic history on her desk, one of the volumes fell open to a page containing the full text of the Shahada in both Arabic and English. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasul Allah. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. As Sarah read the words aloud for the first time, the classroom filled with a warm, golden light that seemed to emanate from the text itself. Unlike the previous phenomena, this light felt deeply personal, as if it were responding to her voice and her heart rather than simply displaying for observation. In that moment of impossible radiance, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace and belonging that she had never experienced before. The emptiness that had quietly plagued her adult life, the sense that professional success and social acceptance weren't quite enough, suddenly filled with purpose and connection. She understood with a clarity that transcended rational analysis that she had found what she hadn't known she was searching for. The light gradually faded, but the sense of transformation remained. Sarah sat in her classroom as evening shadows lengthened, knowing that her life had irrevocably changed. The question was no longer whether these events were supernatural signs pointing her toward Islam, but whether she had the courage to follow where they led. The next morning's multicultural festival proved to be a turning point for the entire school community. Sarah's Islamic culture booth drew steady crowds of curious families, many encountering accurate information about Islam for the first time. The Hassan family and other Muslim volunteers answered questions with patience and warmth, gradually dispelling misconceptions and building bridges with their neighbors. Standing beside the display, watching children from different backgrounds learn about each other's traditions with natural curiosity and acceptance, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness about her growing connection to Islam. This was what she had always tried to create in her classroom: understanding across difference, knowledge overcoming fear, and recognition of shared humanity despite varying beliefs. After the festival, Sarah made an appointment to speak privately with Dr. Hassan about her spiritual journey. "I think I'm ready to convert to Islam," she told him. but I'm terrified about what it will mean for my career, my relationships, my entire life." Dr. Hassan nodded with understanding. Converting to Islam in America, especially for someone in a visible profession like teaching, requires courage. There will be challenges, but there will also be a community of believers ready to support you, and most importantly, there will be the peace that comes from aligning your life with your deepest convictions. They discuss the practical implications, how conversion might affect her job security, her relationship with her secular parents, her social life, and her daily routines. Dr. Hassan was honest about the difficulties while emphasizing the spiritual benefits that made those challenges worthwhile. "Islam will not make your life easier," he explained, "but it will make your life more meaningful. Every action becomes an act of worship when performed with the right intention. Every challenge becomes an opportunity for spiritual growth." Sarah took another week to make her final decision, spending time in prayer and reflection. She called her parents to share her spiritual journey, receiving a mixed reaction that ranged from bewilderment to concern, but ultimately included support for her right to make her own choices. She researched how other professional women had navigated conversion to Islam, finding inspiring stories of teachers, doctors, lawyers, and businesswomen who had successfully integrated their faith with their careers. On a sunny Friday afternoon in May, Sarah drove to the Islamic Center of Portland for Jumu'ah prayers. Dr. Hassan had arranged for her to meet with the imam and several community members who would serve as witnesses to her conversion. As she sat in the women's section of the mosque, wearing a borrowed hijab and listening to the Arabic prayers she was beginning to understand, Sarah felt the same sense of peace that had filled her classroom during the final miraculous event. When the time came, she stood before the small gathering and spoke the Shahada with conviction. "Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasul Allah." The words felt both momentous and natural, as if she were finally acknowledging a truth her heart had recognized months earlier. The community welcomed her with warm embraces and prayers, officially making her part of a global ummah that transcended national and ethnic boundaries. Returning to school the following Monday as a new Muslim brought its own set of challenges and discoveries. Sarah chose to wear hijab, marking her conversion visibly to students, colleagues, and parents. The reactions ranged from curiosity to support to occasional hostility, but Sarah faced each response with the patience and dignity she had learned from the Hassan family. Some parents requested meetings to discuss their concerns about having a Muslim teacher. Sarah approached these conversations as educational opportunities, sharing her journey and emphasizing her continued commitment to inclusive secular education. Most parents left these meetings with greater understanding and respect for her choice, though a few requested transfers for their children. Her principal proved supportive, recognizing that Sarah's conversion hadn't changed her effectiveness as an educator. If anything, her new sense of purpose seemed to enhance her natural empathy and classroom management skills. The Islamic emphasis on knowledge-seeking aligned perfectly with her educational philosophy, while the discipline of daily prayers helped structure her time more effectively. Students adapted quickly, with many expressing curiosity about her hijab and asking respectful questions about her new faith. Sarah used these moments to reinforce lessons about diversity and mutual respect while maintaining appropriate boundaries around religious instruction in public schools. Amira, now thriving academically and socially, seemed particularly proud to see her teacher embracing the faith that had guided her family through their darkest times. "Miss Mitchell," she said after class one day, "do you think Allah sent us to your classroom so you could learn about Islam?" Sarah smiled, considering the remarkable chain of events that had led to her conversion. "I think Allah's ways are mysterious, but I'm grateful for whatever brought us together." The miraculous events that had marked Sarah's journey toward Islam never recurred after her conversion, as if their purpose had been fulfilled. She sometimes wondered if other teachers experienced similar signs, or if she had been uniquely blessed with supernatural guidance. Ultimately, she decided the question mattered less than the transformation those experiences had enabled. A year after her conversion, Sarah organized a professional development workshop for educators about teaching in religiously diverse classrooms. Drawing from her experience on both sides of the equation, she helped colleagues understand how to honor students' faith backgrounds while maintaining educational standards and constitutional requirements. The workshop proved popular enough to be repeated in other districts, establishing Sarah as a resource for educators navigating similar challenges. Her story, the public school teacher who converted to Islam after witnessing miracles in her classroom, became an inspiration to other converts, while demonstrating to the broader community that American Muslims could be patriotic educators committed to serving all students. Standing in her classroom 2 years after the first impossible water droplets had formed above her science experiment, Sarah offered her afternoon prayers on a small rug she kept discreetly stored in her supply closet. The same windows that had once framed her restless searching now looked out on a world filled with signs of divine wisdom for those with eyes to see. Her students that year included children from 6 different countries and 4 major religious traditions. The classroom walls still displayed the same world map with family origin pins, but now it represented something deeper to Sarah, a visual reminder that all of humanity shared common needs, hopes, and spiritual yearnings that transcended cultural differences. During parent conferences that fall, a mother commented on the positive change she had observed in her daughter since the beginning of the school year. Emma used to complain about school being boring, but now she comes home excited about what she's learning. She says you make everything seem important and connected. Sarah smiled, remembering her own transformation from someone who saw teaching as just a job to recognizing it as a sacred trust. When you believe that knowledge is a blessing and every student is a precious creation, education becomes a form of worship. The mother looked puzzled by the comment, but Sarah didn't elaborate. Some truths could only be understood through personal experience, and she had learned to plant seeds of wisdom without forcing their growth. As the school year progressed, Sarah found herself mentoring other educators who were struggling with questions of purpose and meaning in their work. Without proselytizing or crossing professional boundaries, she demonstrated how faith could enhance rather than compromise one's commitment to public education. Her example proved particularly powerful for colleagues who had previously viewed Islam through the lens of political conflicts and media stereotypes. Seeing a respected teacher integrate her faith with professional excellence challenged assumptions while building bridges between communities. The Hassan family remained close friends with Dr. Hassan, eventually having his credentials recognized and returning to university teaching. Fatima completed nursing certification programs and returned to healthcare work. Amira, now in middle school, had become fluent in English while maintaining her Arabic skills and Islamic identity. Miss Mitchell, Amira said during a chance encounter at the grocery store, "I wanted to thank you for showing me that we can be proud Muslims and successful Americans at the same time." Sarah hugged her former student, remembering the shy, homesick girl who had unknowingly served as an instrument of divine guidance. "Thank you for showing me that faith and reason can work together to reveal truth." Looking back on her journey from skeptical secularist to committed Muslim, Sarah marveled at how dramatically her life had changed while somehow becoming more authentically herself. The career that had once felt routine now felt like a calling. The relationships that had once seemed superficial now carried spiritual significance. The questions that had once frustrated her now led to deeper understanding. Most remarkably, the emptiness that had quietly haunted her adult life had been replaced by a profound sense of purpose and connection. Every day brought opportunities to serve Allah through serving His creation, whether by inspiring a struggling student, supporting a worried parent, or simply demonstrating that Muslims could be positive contributors to American society. Standing in her classroom as another school year drew to a close, Sarah offered a prayer of gratitude for the miraculous events that had guided her toward Islam. She no longer needed supernatural signs to confirm her faith. The daily miracles of transformation, understanding, and grace were sufficient evidence of divine presence in her life. The journey that had begun with impossible water droplets suspended in air had led her home to a truth that had always existed, waiting patiently for her heart to recognize what her mind had been too proud to acknowledge. In embracing Islam, she had not lost her identity as an American, an educator, or an independent thinker. Instead, she had discovered the deeper purpose that gave meaning to all her roles and relationships. As she locked her classroom door and walked toward another weekend of community service, prayer, and continued learning, Sarah Mitchell, now Sarah Abdullah, smiled with the contentment of someone who had found exactly where she belonged in Allah's vast and wonderful creation.